Vince, for putting together such a great panel so quickly. Obviously, this is an issue that is on a lot of our minds right now. Gun violence in America has been on our minds for a very long time, but now in a different way. I think it's in the papers and in the media and in mainstream conversations in ways that perhaps are good if it brings us to outcomes, but certainly upsetting for so many reasons. So I've been asked to tell you that we are live tweeting. The hashtag is PNYEvent, so tweet or sign in, follow, do whatever you do with Twitter that makes you happy. And I would also like to tell you about an upcoming event that we think is going to be a particularly interesting one for Philanthropy New York that's being done in collaboration with Duke University and the Wagner School at NYU, which is in February, called Money and Power in Post-Election America. I like anything with the word power in it, so that's pretty exciting to me. And that's February 11th and 12th. It's for funders, so those of you who are here and interested, you can find it, I believe, on the website. Is that right? And now I am just going to turn it over to Vince, who I'm sure will do a masterful job of coordinating this event. Thank you, Vince.
Thanks, Lori. Thanks for hosting us at this event. I'm Vince Stehle, Executive Director of Media Impact Funders and former board member here, board chair at Philanthropy New York. So it's always great to come back to New York and participate with our colleagues here in important events. I think none more important than the one we've pulled together in relatively hastily in philanthropy times to pull this discussion and this panel together for such an urgent matter. It's just, we're coming together just 1 month after the horrifying shooting in Newtown, Connecticut. And it's already clear, I think, that this is not just another sad milestone on the road to nowhere, that obviously this event has affected all of us and the nation in a way that has sort of broken through the complacency of our political and our culture. And we're seeing remarkable changes already happening in Washington and in Albany, even today, even with the events of the last 24 hours, to have what's happening in Albany today. I'm sure we're going to be hearing about that a lot from our speakers today. And we are really very fortunate to have with us here in the room, and for those of you participating on the live stream, a remarkable panel of expertise who really, if they hadn't had this invitation, they really should be in Albany. So if you need a doctor's note or something like that to get you out of that obligation, we'll sign it. But we really appreciate that both Dan and Jackie in particular, who might have been in Albany for events there. So with all that's happening in Washington and Albany and the state capitals around the country, in political circles, we also recognize that no laws, no regulations, no political actions are going to immediately transform American culture, society, that there are some very deeply rooted practices, attitudes, and behaviors which result in the tragic occurrence of gun violence every day that exceeds the horrors that we saw in Newtown that one day a month ago. And I'm sure we'll hear a lot about that, but I think this is actually a very good place for philanthropy to be focusing, which is not in the immediate and political, but in the long-term challenges facing society and grappling with the 32 homicides daily, the nearly 80 gun deaths daily that mount and give us a really unique and unfortunate reality in American society. So with that, I want to acknowledge that most everybody who gets very deeply involved in the question of gun violence has a particular and personal experience to relate to it. And I think nowhere is that more clear than our first speaker today. He has recently taken over as president of the Brady Center and the Brady campaign to prevent gun violence. But Dan Gross was also the head of the Center to Prevent Youth Violence, an organization he founded after his brother was shot in another remarkable event that is a famous shooting that some of you might recall on the top of the Empire State Building. And Dan turned away from his previous career and has devoted himself to fighting gun violence in our nation. And so we'll talk about each of our participants as we go through it, but I want to start by inviting Dan Gross to offer his comments. We'll hear from each of our presenters, and we can take comments and questions both in the room and through questions on live tweeting that will be coming from the live stream. And we'll take comments and questions in each section, and then we'll move to hear from Jackie Hilly and Maria Cuomo Cole and Roderick Jenkins in that order. And we'll hear and we'll see a bit of media interspersed within our discussions to see other ways that philanthropy can engage in reframing this debate on gun violence. So thanks, and
Sure. Hi, everyone. First, want to thank everyone for coming and everyone out there in the Twitter sphere for joining us as well. It really is inspiring, and it's, I think, a great testimony to be able to pull an event like this together on such short notice to the dramatic change we've already seen in this issue over the past month. Like Vince said, only a month since Newtown, and kind of the world as we know it on this issue has changed to the extent that there were a lot of people clamoring to make this a defining cultural issue, an issue that the media was paying appropriate attention to. That's happening. You know, we were working to convene a national conversation. We had started to see a lot of change already occurring prior to Newtown. There was a lot of momentum. After Aurora, we launched this We Are Better Than This campaign to convene a national conversation to demonstrate that this is an issue that has support from across the nation, across the political spectrum, including gun owners and NRA members, frame the issue in a way where it's just it's based on our common values, not what we're against, but what we're for state, for nation. And we really started to see a conversation percolating, at the very least. You saw people like Bill O'Reilly and Rupert Murdoch and Mike Gerson, George W. Bush's speechwriter. This is all pre-Newtown. Bob Costas, we all know how, and I talked to him, by the way, and he would like to be here, but he unfortunately has other commitments, being in the height of playoff season and so forth. But this is really a conversation that was starting to happen, and Newtown took it to a whole different level in terms of public engagement, public outrage, public sympathy. Our goal pre-Newtown and post-Newtown has remained the same, which is to, and our strategic plan we had put in place remains the same, to create a sustained outcry for policy change and to address this issue also as the fundamental issue of public health and safety in our nation that it is. We just got more done in a month against those goals than we had thought we were going to be able to do in a year. But it's been very heartening to us to see the extent to which we were on the right track. We think that there are, kind of bottom line, two real key components to creating fundamental change on this issue. And you see it manifesting itself very encouragingly in these conversations that we're having with the White House and the conversation that's going on out there in culture. One is the voice of the American public, that sustained level of engagement and outcry that's necessary to hold our elected leaders accountable. The only place in our nation where this is a heated partisan political debate is in the halls of Congress and in the halls of a number of state houses. The overwhelming majority of Americans agree as a nation, we're better than this. They agree with those goals of making this a safer nation. NRA members, gun owners, are mothers and fathers to like the rest of us. Everybody's hearts break equally when we see a tragedy like Newtown, or when we read on the front page of the New York Times that there were 3 murders in Chicago on New Year's Day. And you know, the key and what's been missing on this issue historically, which we're committed to really creating, and I told this to the Vice President himself when we met with him, is sustaining that outcry. Because, you know, the typical arc when these big tragedies happen is, you know, a number of well-intentioned legislators rush out there with policy proposals that are usually based on the specific tragedy that happened, very often around an assault weapons ban, for example. And then the public resolve to do something about this issue fades with it, as the headlines inevitably do. And we have been like a laser beam committed to making sure that it doesn't fade this time. This task force, and the results are going to be announced tomorrow, we're going to be at an event at the White House, has been tremendously helpful in that regard, because they're putting all these well-intentioned proposals in the proper context, which is not just what can we do to prevent tragedies like Newtown and Aurora, but what can we do to prevent the 10,000 murders that happen in our nation every year, the 30,000 gun deaths that happen in our nation every year, the 100,000 shootings that happen every year. And if you listen to what the President and Vice President have been saying all along, they've been making that very important pivot, saying we need to talk about Newtown, but we also need to talk about these tragedies. And they're also listening. They're listening to the American public, which makes our job of engaging them in support of these solutions easier. They know that the overwhelming majority of Americans support solutions like background checks. You know, right now, 40% of all gun sales in our country don't require background checks. It means every day convicted felons, domestic abusers, terrorists, dangerously mentally ill are able to buy guns without anybody knowing who they are, and they can buy them at gun shows. Calling it a gun show loophole really trivializes it. Or on the internet, with the added anonymity that the internet provides. You know, the recommendations tomorrow, I'm very confident, are going to reflect not only tangibly what we can do. They're going to be based on not what we can do to prevent Newtown, but all the gun deaths that happen, but also a fundamental respect for the fact that keeping guns out of the hands of dangerous people has nothing to do, isn't contrary to the Second Amendment, and that's why gun owners and NRA members support solutions like that. So that's kind of part one, engaging the voice of the American public. The other piece of it is kind of this comprehensive look at this issue that includes policy, like what we've been talking about around background checks. And background checks really is the best. You'll hear something about assault weapons, very important. It's a conversation the American public wants to have. You'll hear something about high capacity ammunition. You'll hear a very important conversation around the collection of data, which is very lacking on this issue. And that's kind of the policy end of it. The other very heartening part of it is that the task force also really wants to engage in a conversation around what we can do. Hi, Maria. Can do to encourage important changes in our attitudes and behaviors and social norms through public health and safety education. We have a lot of experience through the Center to Prevent Youth Violence and PACs creating campaigns along those lines. There's an important conversation, just as one example, and then I'll pass it on to my esteemed colleagues here. You know, there's a lot of gravity around this conversation right now around mental health. Unfortunately, that gravity is to kind of pull it apart from the gun issue, to talk about it in terms of access to care. And there are a million important conversations to be having around this issue because it is such a complex issue, and that's an important conversation. There's also a lot of overlap specifically between mental health and access to guns. And you know, we really look at a big part of our goal is to keep those conversations together in the name of what can we do, for example, to keep guns out of the hands of the very specific people with the very specific mental illnesses that create a predisposition toward harming oneself or harming others. You know, background checks is obviously one thing, but you can also envision a public health and safety campaign along the lines of the ones that we've put together, and we are going to be around this issue to educate parents and spouses of people with those mental illnesses to that, this is Lanza. If your son has a dangerous mental illness, maybe it isn't the best idea to have an arsenal in the house. And that's happening all across our country every day, and it's leading to countless, because of the lack of data, countless number of tragedies in the form of accidents, suicide, homicides. So just by educating, changing social norms around the 300 million guns that are already out there in our country, and creating and inspiring a rational conversation in terms of the cost-benefit analysis people do when they make a decision to bring a gun into the home, we can quantify the number of lives we can save by making homes safer, along the lines of secondhand smoke, friends don't let friends drive drunk. So right now, that cost-benefit analysis is way out of whack. We see in the media the glamorization of owning guns, the use of guns for self-defense, all valid, all valid. One can use a gun for self-defense, the recreational benefits of guns. But what we don't have an honest conversation about is the dangers. So that's the other part of this is, addressing this from a policy perspective, but also if we're really going to look at it comprehensively, what are the programs that we can do to change social norms in inner cities? I know the other panelists will talk about that. What can we do to change social norms from a public health and safety perspective to tangibly reduce gun violence in our nation? And so, the basic framework is policy deals with the sale, transfer, trafficking of guns, gun benefits people, and social norm changes around the guns that are already out there to foster public health and safety. And both in neither case are those solutions contrary to the right of a law-abiding gun owner to own guns or our respect for that right.
Great. So as I say, we can take a couple of questions here and then go to the next presenter. But I wonder if I might start. Dan, is there something that foundations could or should be supporting, an area of activity, or even an example of a foundation that is supporting a particular line of work that would be a good illustration that goes beyond the immediate sort of policy political discussion?
Yeah, but with the disclaimer that there's a lot of room that's been, I think, under-realized in terms of supporting the policy agenda as well in the form of a true sustained campaign to engage the voice of the American people. That doesn't have to be C4 stuff. There's a lot of stuff you can do in that regard along the lines of this We Are Better Than This campaign, for example, to really build the army, so to speak, that we're going to need to create change on this issue and to keep them engaged. We're very cognizant of those lines between C3 and C4. And, when you look back on the past around Brady, it's been kind of way too skewed towards C4. And as a result, we haven't gotten as much institutional support as we can get for the policy work. That said, yeah, there are numerous examples through PACs and the Center to Prevent Youth Violence, and there's some others out there in terms of support for these outcome-based public health and safety programs. I mean, that's really one of the great benefits of creating saturation campaigns, for example, around insights like the Ask campaign that we created, where we did a study in Rockford, Illinois, with the Harvard School of Public Health, demonstrating the impact that you can have on changing social norms by encouraging parents to ask if there are guns in the homes where their kids play. It's a partnership with the American Academy of Pediatrics, all sorts of local partnerships, a lot of media involved with it. And then, you have metrics. Do our parents asking the question, what impact is that having around the decision to bring a gun into the home, the decision in terms of how to store that gun? And then when you can create mass change along those lines, you can also quantify the impact that you've had on public safety. You can attach a risk to a home with a gun and a risk to a home without a gun or with the gun stored safely, and you can quantify the number of lives that you have the potential to save. And that received some significant institutional support. The Broad Foundation in California is now supporting both the Ask campaign and another CPYB campaign, which is now, by the way, part of Brady. It's folded into Brady. called Speak Up, which provides a hotline and messaging to young people who almost always know about an act of violence before it occurs, to provide them with the resources and the inspiration to anonymously speak up and prevent violence. Again, highly quantifiable. Another campaign that we created was called Suicide Proof Your Home with the Rhode Island Department of Health, a federal SAMHSA grant. By the way, Speak Up received federal funding as well. And that's based on this idea, the proven notion that a home with a gun is 5 times more likely to have a suicide in it. And you've heard facts like that coming from folks, trying to make this nation safer, or regarding guns. But it needs to be put in a context where it's part of a true public health and safety campaign to create kind of the ubiquity and insight that you need to really get people to take action around it. And again, we work with Brown to measure the impact of that program, and it's had a significant one in terms of attitudes and behaviors around guns. And so when I talk about creating a campaign around mental health, identifying those mental illnesses that with a predisposition toward harming oneself or others, and education around changing social norms with partners in the mental health field, as well as the smart strategic use of partnership with media. That's the kind of campaign that I'm talking about.
Any brief questions? And if you'd like to identify yourself, you may. And if you would prefer not for the live stream or what have you, either way.
Yeah.
And I'll just repeat for the live stream audience, what lines of research are needed?
All of them. As it relates to data on the gun violence issue, and it gets into the politics of this, the gun lobby has been very effective in blocking agencies like the CDC, for example, in terms of collecting data, because they know that the truth shall set us free, and as a result, they don't want that truth to be known, and blocking data has been a big part of it. I know the Joyce Foundation has been very involved in funding studies, but compared to what we can do if we really have the resources of the federal government behind us, it's not nearly enough, or a number of these other foundations behind us, it's not nearly enough. I am very heartened in kind of the conversations that we're having with the task force in terms of being hopeful that it's going to be part of their recommendation, and there's even thought that's actually something that can be done in that category of executive action that they're talking about a lot. Jack, I don't know on the data front if there's anything else you wanted to add.
No, I would just confirm what Dan says. I think the data, we're basically data starved right now because of the effect the NRA has had on the CDC. There used to be, for example, reports issued about doing youth work in New York, where you could go by city and see what the ages of the kids were that were picking up guns, what kinds of guns, what kinds of crimes they were being used in, and the impact of that could be easily describing some work that needed to be done in the community. We no longer have those facts available to us because they have discontinued those reports. And in preparation for the task force this week, a group of scientists that frankly come from all kinds of universities around the country have written a letter. It's under the letterhead of the University of Chicago, pleading for more research to be done and more research to be allowed. I mean, it's very, very little research on gun trafficking, other than this completely, overrated Fast and Furious thing that people have heard about. I mean, Fast and Furious happens every day in our country. Unfortunately, a lot of them stay here, and they don't go to Mexico. So I think there's a lot of politics. I know we talked about the media impact. I think the media has been, frankly, standing on the sidelines a lot. So any kind of media research that could help us advance the efforts that we're working on would be tremendously helpful. And I think the public campaigns that Dan described. I was an early user of the Ask campaign. I think it's a fantastic campaign to really put in all public facilities around the country. I think the kind of work that I do at the local level right here in communities in New York is frankly critical to making sure that communities that happen to be awash with guns and have many, many young people in them are educating their youth and directing youth towards exactly not picking up guns and not thinking that they're going to be safer. So I think there's a lot of different avenues. There's a public health approach to research, using public hospitals as points of intervention for both suicide and also for retaliation and homicides. There are models out there around the country that are frankly very unfunded and could use a lot more funding. Right here in New York City, the ceasefire models that we're trying to get started through the City Council Gun Violence Task Force. All our city hospitals could use a program, frankly, that would act as a point of intervention where you would have a nurse or someone who's on site all the time to talk to families if there's a risk of suicide, because 2/3 of the people who are killed in this country by guns are killed by suicide. And if you live in a home where a gun is, as a child, you are, I think, 5 times more likely to be killed in a suicide murder, and as a woman, 3 times as likely. So the risk to the extended family is a significant risk of suicide, and that's an area where we need more support. And the 1/3 of deaths that are homicides in this country, there is a point of intervention frequently in a public hospital, because people frequently go to public hospitals to receive treatments for wounds if they survive. And if they die, their families go there and they are talking to people who work there. So it's a significant opportunity for funders to impact a change in behavior.
And I just want to frame the research things kind of broadly. There's a lot of great information going on, and I wouldn't blame all of you after listening to Jack. Your heads are spinning a little bit in terms of all the opportunities, because it's one of those issues. First of all, I want to volunteer to the extent that anybody wants to connect any interest in funding research to the recommendations of the task force. We're working very closely with the administration, and we would be happy to connect the dots on that, given whatever's in their proposal. Just to give a framework to the research question, what's missing on this issue is a true epidemiological study of what the cause is as it relates to guns, and there are others too, and we'll talk about some of those others. But just as it relates to guns, what causes these deaths and injuries? So on one side of that model, you have every gun that initially goes through a federally licensed firearm dealer in some way, and then they kind of go through some highly predictable paths to causing that violence. Either they get into the hands of people who shouldn't have them and can be prevented from having them, or they go through the hands of someone who initially purchases it without any malintent, a law-abiding person. And then you can diagnose from an epidemiological perspective how those guns, either they're stolen from those homes, or and how they get into the hands of dangerous people, or directly from those homes, they cause homicides, crimes of passion. 50% of violent acts, in domestic abuse and violence against women, the victim knows the perpetrator intimately, or is very close with them. So we know these paths that they take, but we don't have the numbers around them. So I think putting them in the context of a model like that, which we have started to lay out, is the right way to identify where the most urgent research needs are. How many guns are stolen, and what violence does that lead to? It also makes you look at something like the assault weapons ban, perhaps in a different context. How many lives are taken as a result of assault weapons, and versus universal background checks, and the lack of universal background checks on 40% of all gun sales. So So we're working hard to put it all in the context of this epidemiological model. We'd also be very happy to share that with you.
So thanks, Megan, for I think a question that really unlocked a very rich vein of discussion. I think we should go to the next presenter. If we can you hold your question? Or do you want to? I'd like to move to the next. I'll just touch on a couple of quick things I heard. One is I think that point that 2/3 of gun deaths are suicides. I think that is such an astounding figure, and even if we leave it at that, it doesn't. It begs the question of an event like Newtown, which was in one instance a suicide, but also connected to 27 homicides. How many homicides are related to suicides also? I mean, I don't know what the research would show on that. But the other thing, maybe perhaps in a little bit more hopeful way of thinking, is getting people to think differently, and the philanthropic role in supporting media that gets people to think differently. So I'd like to maybe, in the room, we're going to take a look at a new PSA from the Brady campaign that is called "We Are Better Than This." On the live stream, you have a link to the PSAs as well. We're going to show the first one right now.
Mass shootings in movie theaters.
That's great. And I think that PSA was just cut in the last 2 weeks. And obviously mixes both some familiar faces, but also the sad but unfamiliar faces of victims and their families of gun violence. So now I'd like to turn it to Jackie Hilly, who really ought to be in Albany today, but she's here with us. So thank you very much for making time to be with us today, Jackie. I think her pathway was driven somewhat, and she might say a word about this, as in the early part of her career, she was a prosecutor and saw gun violence showing up on the other side of the bench in court, and then in the rest of her career. But I'll be brief, just to invite Jackie to tell us about what's happening right now in the political and policy circles, but also what philanthropy can do to support your work.
Thank you so much, and thanks everyone for being here. I really appreciate the opportunity to talk about our work and talk about the work that we do together. I think everybody who's listening should know that I am the leader of a statewide organization, and we work on both education and advocacy. But we work with all of the national leaders that you read about in the paper every day. We work very closely with the Brady campaign, we work with the Mayors Against Illegal Guns, and we work with an umbrella organization of 25 states to share resources and ideas and opportunities, and we share our work with other people. One of the most generous funders to our work over the last 6 years is sitting here at the table with me. It's the New York Community Trust, and Roderick has worked with us and is very familiar with our work. We, a long time ago, did some research about the 3 communities in New York where most of the young people were arrested for possessing guns. And we decided to do some work in those communities to try to change the outcomes and to talk to the kids who live there. And so we set up an after-school program, and we work in Crown Heights, Brooklyn, in Washington Heights, and in the South Bronx. And we work with about 100 kids every week who are mostly high school age kids. Some of them are middle school age children. And we talk to them about gun violence. We don't jump in and talk to them about gun violence right away. We use a youth development model that we have worked on over many years and kind of combine the best of different practices to talk to them first about personal responsibility and then community engagement. And they do things like community mapping, and they try to impact the safety of their own communities in various ways. And we try to train them to be good public speakers so that they'll feel confident, and we educate them about gun laws. So we believe in this effort because the kids who live in communities that are awash with illegal guns are the kids who every day are confronted with the standard stereotypical myths about gun violence, that you'll be safer if you have a gun, or you'll be safer if you join a gang, or you'll be safer if you hang around with a crowd that's not a, it's like in a bad crowd, or you'll also be punished if you're a snitch. I think gun being a safe thing and being a snitch are probably the two biggest myths that we work on all the time with the community of kids that we work with. And kids take to advocacy really like ducks to water. I mean, they absolutely, positively are the most astounding advocates. And we go to local congressional offices, we go to city council offices, we go to hearings with them, we bring them to Albany, we bring them to Washington, D.C., and they are completely empowered by being able to speak for themselves. One of the biggest complaints that we have from kids who live in communities that have so much gun violence is that they are misrepresented by the media, and they are never accurately represented as who they are and what they're doing. There are literally tens of thousands of kids every day in New York who ride the street, the subways and the buses and walk the streets, who do absolutely the right thing. And we want to give those kids support to do it. So we partner with whoever is there to share our mission and our goal. We partner with media people like Downtown Community Television, which is a wonderful organization here in New York City. And we have made PSAs together. They've made more than 50 films. We work with Summer Youth Employment. We work with PAL. So we try to educate the kids so that they can really speak for themselves. We don't try to edit them. We just try to give them the ability to say what's on their mind. I think that is sort of an addendum to the kind of thing that you just saw with the Brady campaign, or We Are Better Than This, where you're talking to victims. When I brought 300 kids to Albany several years ago, a young woman was going to make a speech, and she kind of crumbled up her speech because the NRA had decided to come that day, on the same day we were there. And they kept stopping our kids in the hallway saying, oh, you'd look good with a pink gun, or you'd look good with a holster, and we had forewarned our kids not really to engage with the NRA members. But this young woman had just lost a friend 2 days before, who was shot and killed on the streets of Brooklyn. So when she got up to the microphone, she sort of addressed the whole crowd and said, you're the ones who need to be educated, and then said, who in this assemblage of kids has lost somebody to gun violence or knows somebody who's lost somebody to gun violence? And out of the 300 kids, there were probably 2/3 of the audience stood up. So it was very profound to see that this really impacts young people's lives in many communities. Frequently, they're communities of color. Frequently, they're poor communities. And in respect to what Vince had asked me to address was how our work intersects with some of the wonderful work that you all support. And I can tell you there's many, many intersections, because on a personal level, we get a lot of requests from other programs that are out there, programs who are helping kids age out of foster care, for example. They want us to come and talk to their kids about gun violence. They want us to come and talk to their kids and give them public speaking skills, because we have public speaking workshops. So that's one way. The obesity question is a question that is really foremost in a lot of public health discussions, and it impacts cities very dramatically. And our kids, when we talk to our kids, there are not the public spaces for them to be out playing around. And you know what? Their parents don't want them in the playground, because it's all too clear that sometimes there's gunfire and they can't be there. They they don't have the same benefit of public spaces that you might have in other parts of the country. So trying to control obesity, which is all great and wonderful, it has a real concern on the part of the parents. So what we try to do is we try to activate our kids to make practical changes, and I can give you one good example. Our kids were being robbed on the way from their high school in Brooklyn to the bus stop and to the subway stop. And their parents didn't want them staying after school for after-school programming because they didn't want them getting robbed on the way home or threatened. And so through our program, they did a survey of the kids in the school, and then they decided to contact the local precinct and talk to them about the robberies that were occurring. And then the precinct went with them to the city council member's office, and they couldn't change the subway, but they could change the bus stop. And so they put the bus stop directly across from the school. So the kids had the option to go home on the bus. That's a practical way in which we try to empower the kids, try to make them understand, because we believe that the people who live in the community know the terrain the best, they know what's going on the best, and we're trying to give them the tools. So a state organization like mine is, apparent in a lot of different states around the country. I think everybody is trying to work with their community in whatever way the problems might present themselves. And so supporting state organizations to do the work on the ground with communities, we have really innumerable requests. I wish I could fulfill a request for every group that asks us to come and talk to their youth about gun violence, because it's a very, very powerful advocate when you have a young person who is well educated about where the guns are coming from in a state like New York, where the guns are coming from outside of our state for the most part into our city. So I'll stop there because I could obviously go on and on, but I'll leave it to you to ask any questions if you'd like.
Questions? Do you want to come back with your question from an earlier moment, or is it? Yeah, we can come back to that. Okay. All right. Well, you covered a lot of ground, and I'm sure we'll have further discussion about this experience too. So for our next speaker, Marie Cuomo Cole could also be excused for being in Albany today, probably. As the sister and daughter of governors, she knows a thing or two about Albany and the way of political. Maybe not. Okay, so this is a very special afternoon. Yeah. Absolutely. And so all that being said, I think what's most important for us about Maria is her role as a philanthropist and a nonprofit activist, as chairman, I think, of Help USA, one of the largest and most effective homeless service agencies. She brings her familiarity with this issue from long years of service to that organization, where she has told me that she experienced too many gun deaths of the people being cared for by her organization, and that's what motivated her to come to this issue. And she's also a filmmaker. She's a filmmaker who most recently has produced The Invisible War, which recently got a nod from the Oscars, an Academy Award nomination. So good luck on that. But in the meantime, she also produced Living for 32, which is a very important moving film, a short film that we're going to show at the conclusion of this briefing here today at 5 p.m. But right now, I think it'd be nice if we could take a minute or two to see the trailer of that film, which we're going to show in the room. And for those of you on the live stream, you can click on the link to the trailer for Living for 32.
And Vince, while it's being queued up, I would also add, knowing that Maria Silmata, she would never blow her own horn. Maria also produced those We Are Better Than This essays. So very great.
Thank you.
Yesterday.
day began like any other day. Students woke up and they headed to class. And soon,
My name is Roderick. I was one of the few survivors. After I graduated, I wanted to know what else I could still do. What are we doing? Audio video? You know, you've been in one gun show, you've been in all gun shows. Sometimes all you need is a license. Sometimes you need that.
but this is legal. All of this is legal. Everything that was done is legal. Do you want it?
You need the right to defend ourselves, anything that we have to do that.
You can't have anything on that. You gotta be in the middle. You gotta have reasonable restrictions, reasonable regulations that come in the middle.
But unfortunately, there are people that don't have a right to do that, and so it's kind of like, we should speak to them.
I'm afraid that it's a good thing to do, so it's the fight out fight, and the fight out will fight.
So it's a powerful film, and I hope all of you will be able to stay for that. If you're not able to, we can give you a screener to take away. And if anybody on the live stream is unable to see it, but wants to see it rather, please contact us and we'll make that available to you as well. So Maria, tell us a few.
Thank you very much. Yes, 5 p.m. is a hard time to watch a film. So, but I want to thank Jackie too, because Jackie actually screened the film, I think, twice for communities here in New York. And the communities you've heard of youth that you've heard Jackie describe are really exactly the motivation for me to get involved with the gun issue. Help USA is an organization that builds housing models for homeless and special needs populations in New York and in communities across the country. And our experience, particularly in New York, in East New York, Brooklyn, and in Brownsville, very tough communities, underserved communities, to say the least, where gun violence has really ravaged the fabric of family life. And through our first 10 years of investing resources, financial, human capital, creating liaisons with community organizations to help counter the fear on the streets, the fear in one's homes, we had really very disappointing results in terms of the loss of human life. I've witnessed mothers losing their sons, their children shot and killed just in front of our building in East New York, literally. Partnerships with the local police departments, which were terrific, 3 precincts, with the DA's office, with federal agencies, are important and made some impact, but not enough. The gun deaths continued and continued. Over a decade ago, I became involved with the Brady organization to try to understand the issue better and try to bring some resolve to our own communities. And I have to say, in that period of time, I can't say that there has been a more important time for the Brady organization to really accelerate its agenda. You know, it is an unusual organization. It is really the only organization doing the work that needs to be done on a legislative level in Washington. And I also feel that as a nonprofit organization, from a management perspective, the challenges that the gun organizations, that Jackie's, that Dan's, have to overcome in order to really perform excellent work. And the outcomes that have resulted from those efforts, considering how little support they've really been able to get from the private sector and the public funding sector, is quite remarkable. So my hat's off to both of you. Through the years on the Brady team, on the board, you know, we struggled to find the best way to really put a human face on the issue. This, of course, is, in the most visceral way, a human issue, and how to really demonstrate that in a sensitive way And there were tries even before the internet at using media and using film as a tool to advocate and documenting stories. Our experience is like most in the gun space in that it was extremely difficult to move the message and move these stories in the media for reasons we all understand. When I heard Colin Goddard speak 5 years ago now about his experience at Virginia Tech as a college student sitting in his classroom, I really felt compelled to film his story, to film his account, and share it. Here was a young, vivacious, intelligent student, not from an inner city community, who was innocently victimized in the most horrific way. He was shot multiple times and nearly killed, certainly traumatized. In our filming session, with Colin sitting at a desk sharing his testimony, we felt that we needed really to take it to the next place, and I asked if he would tour us on the campus and relive that experience to an extent. And that is the footage you just saw. And it was really a very moving firsthand account of the incident, and one that resulted in attention across the country. We've used the film in a number of ways as a social advocacy tool, and it's been most effective, I have felt, in college communities, on campuses, where local members from the faith community, from the political community, the residential community, and students come together, view the film, and then actually speak with Colin in a question and answer period. And no matter where we are, whether it is a difficult, more resistant community like Florida, or communities in Arizona and Texas, or if we're in the Northeast, we hear the same sort of propaganda, the same sort of disbelief about our own gun laws. You mean this is legal? You mean these transactions were legal? How is that possible? There are issues that are complex and that people really don't understand. And then, of course, the responses that we expect from conservative communities that have, listened over and over again to the propaganda by the NRA, threatening and scaring one's right as an American Second Amendment. These sessions have been really very enlightening for us because they demonstrate how, through simple engagement, communication, views can be shifted. A cultural shift can occur. And we leave these gatherings with some change and some enlightenment. Not necessarily changed opinions, but information is understood, accepted, absorbed, and we know it will be shared. We've continued the college screenings. We've done over 200. We have worked with communities in different ways. And after each horrific tragedy, we receive requests to screen it again and work with it as a tool. And we're continuing to do so today. This also demonstrated to me the importance of what Dan has been able to accelerate at the Brady organization, which is the use, God bless you, of these personal stories and accounts in public information. So the We Are Better Than This campaign, I personally felt was long overdue. I think it's extremely valuable to see the victims' faces and their stories, survivor stories, clergy members, community leaders, celebrities, law enforcement. These are shared voices and shared communities. We're hoping to drive forth this message as much as possible. Of course, we're taking advantage of all free media opportunities. We're hoping for some paid campaigns as well, and for some support for continued community building initiative around the information sharing. I think a lot of the initiatives that Jackie was describing and that Dan was talking about in terms of Speak Up, children's engagement, conflict resolution, we've worked with gang intervention programs, et cetera. These are all integral into the community fabric of information sharing and education. Education is education about the gun issue is one, unfortunately, that's left often to crisis management and to interventions after the fact. I think every school community in the country today recognizes it's one that needs to be addressed sooner than later and earlier in a child's development. So I would urge you as well to consider those initiatives.
I have a question tweeted in here, and it's what would it take to get the resources for a public health campaign on this topic on the level of anti-smoking? Let's start with you.
Could you repeat the question? Is it regarding funding or support?
Yeah, in terms of philanthropic support and coordination.
Well, I will yield to Dan and Jackie on this question, but I will say that I believe after the decade plus and 10 years before that, watching the issue that this has been a movement. These are not new issues, of course. This is not a new legislative agenda. The Brady bill was passed, of course, in '94. This has been a movement. It is a movement. And today is our time to accelerate it further. And there are numerous ways in which a public-private partnership can be created to do so.
Yeah, I was going to say something very similar. First, regarding public-private partnership. I mean, when you look at the truly successful national campaigns around drink driving, around tobacco, it's involved both public and private resources, and we've been very heartened by when we are able to frame these in the context of really focused campaigns with really deep insights, with clearly defined metrics in terms of the specific attitudes and behaviors that we're going to change. You know, the old tell them what you're going to do it, and then tell them what you did. That these insights are capable of attracting both public and private funding. I talked about Speak Up. I talked about Suicide Proof Your Home. These are campaigns that did attract both. We're very heartened that this task force is talking about social norms change, public health and safety education as part of their as part of their agenda. I'm not 100% sure if it's going to be part of the recommendation tomorrow, but I am 100% sure that whether it is or not, we're going to keep pushing for it in the context of very focused, insightful campaigns. You know, tobacco, secondhand smoke. You look at what that was able to do in terms of creating indignation toward unsafe behavior, changing social norms, and as a result, you know, attracting funding. There were other elements to tobacco, very notably the lawsuits, for example, that fed money into those campaigns. Mothers Against Drunk Driving. Also, you know, when these things are framed the right way in the right kind of campaigns, they attract the level of support that we need. And unless they are, it ain't going to happen. And if this movement has fallen short in recent years, it's because it's been too diffuse. It hasn't, you know, been defined in terms of the whole greater than the sum of its parts that it adds up to, both from a policy perspective and from a public health and safety perspective. And that's what's so inspiring, really, about the moment that we have at hand here, and the leadership of the White House, the leadership of somebody's brother, in terms of really defining these comprehensive solutions, not accepting the fact that, you know, you're not going to prevent every tragedy from happening, and saying that that's not an excuse for inaction. Having the conversation in terms of what can we do to accomplish all of our goals in terms of saving the most possible lives. So really, it really comes down to you know, really presenting this in the right way, presenting it to the public in the right way, and presenting it to the philanthropic community in the right way.
So we have a question here, Lauren. Okay, so just to restate for the live stream audience, how do we reframe these debates and examples of gun violence or gun safety, and how did you come up with the slogan, "We are better than this"?
Well, I will certainly say that most of the media that talks to us still talks in terms of gun control. And a lot of people say, are you an anti-gunner? You know, there's a lot of language out there that we definitely are not, you know, sending out ourselves. We talk in terms of gun safety and gun violence prevention. But the big history out there with a lot of different media people is really about gun control. So it immediately becomes about the policy and not about the people. If we talk about it in terms of gun safety and preventing deaths and injuries, then it's about the people. So I think you're absolutely right that we are in a transition point. I think the campaign that Dan is running now, We Are Better Than This, focusing on people. There are a lot of campaigns that are local campaigns that are trying to do the same thing. That's some of the work that we try to do with our young people to give a face to the experiences that they have. So we frankly need to have public-private partnerships about that because the public is paying dearly for not doing anything about it. I mean, the staggering costs to the state of New York, for example, just on firearms-related injuries. In the city of New York, in 1 year, we spent $117 million on firearms-related injuries. In the state, we spent another $97 million. It's estimated that the country as a whole spends $2 billion on medical costs associated with gun violence. So that is a huge public health problem that public-private partnerships should be addressing. And as Dan's campaign shows, I think if you give a face, just like I was sitting last night watching a tobacco ad and a woman came on and showed that she had lost her fingertips. It's an extremely powerful public health campaign. I think that combined with the education that we've already touched on that most people really don't know, when we go and do educational opportunities, people sit in the audience and say, oh my God, I can't believe that's not the law already. Oh my God, you know, I mean, people are just not aware of how bad our gun laws have become. And so I think public health would be served by that kind of a partnership and public education so that people could be making better choices.
Let me also jump in on this because it's a question that, you know, my background is in advertising. I was a partner at J. Walter Thompson when my brother was shot and wound up starting CPYB. And that's really been the kind of thinking around questions like that we've been bringing to this issue from the outset. And really our perspective is we have to change this whole freaking paradigm that exists in terms of how the media talks about this issue, how it's framed in the public consciousness, and everything that we've been doing has been around that. Easier said than done. It takes two things, extraordinarily deep insight and then extraordinarily deep commitment and focus to sticking with what you're trying to do because there are pitfalls at every turn in terms of being dragged back down into this paradigm of the old political debate that does not exist in mainstream America. You know, the gun lobby, you know, look at what's happened since Newtown. You know, Wayne LaPierre went and had that ridiculous press conference. He knew that he's not speaking even for the overwhelming majority of his members. He doesn't care. What he wants is to get Brady, New Yorkers Against Gun Violence, the other organizations out there to react, to draw us back down into this to go out and protest gun shows so they can say to the law-abiding gun owners who are going to those gun shows, by and large, you see, they're against you. They're trying to take away, they're using it to kind of conjure up this fear and paranoia. So, you know, there are these pitfalls at every turn. The way we've been working to address it is by framing the issue, working really hard to frame the issue as, like Jackie was talking about, this fundamental issue of public health and safety, that it is, and an issue where the overwhelming majority of Americans agree around the solutions, which they do. So when you get into monikers like gun control versus gun safety, you look at We Are Better Than This. We don't even lead with gun. This is deeper. Right now the gun lobby owns that high ground of, America, and it's changing quickly. Rights and my cold dead hands and the Constitution and even safety and protection, and they want to get it into this debate over whether more guns equals more. No, that's not what the overwhelming majority of Americans think. It's not the vision of the American public that more violence, the answer to violence is more violence, the answer to guns is more guns. We're better than this, and we know it, and we need to make sure in the case of policy that our elected officials know it too. In the case of public health and safety, that it's not, we don't just give it the right moniker, but we demonstrate the tangible opportunities that we all buy into to really have that honest conversation about both the benefits, which we should acknowledge. People like to hunt, they like to use guns for recreation. Really easy to sit in an office around the horseshoe, like you say, in New York, and kind of roll our eyes about what people in other parts of the country might be doing or with different views. But we have to come at it with a fundamental respect for the fact that those are mothers, fathers, decent law-abiding people too, and that there are these solutions around both public health and safety and policy. So I'd almost say, I don't want to be flip, I'd almost say that moniker of it, the whole conversation just kind of bugs me a little bit, because you can say it till you're blue in the face to the media. They're still going to, New York Times calls and says, I want to talk about gun control. You only have so much opportunity to get them to change the headline. It's more, really sticking to those fundamental strategic principles in terms of how we frame it and not stepping into those pitfalls.
So before we get to the next question, I would just share an observation about this campaign that I learned from Annie Leonard, who was famous for the Story of Stuff series. And in a panel we did together, she pointed out that by not overly branding her work, she invited every other nonprofit who cared about that issue to use those words that were useful to them to advance their work. And I think I would observe that that's one of the things about this campaign is it's not a branded Brady moniker.
We call it open source campaigning, like open source coding. Take it, use it. We don't care about the Brady logo. Probably one of the most thrilling moments in the last month was when President Obama, in his speech at Newtown, summed the whole thing up the day after we were in the White House meeting with Valerie Jarrett, saying, we're better than this. That's, it's these ideas when they, like friends don't let friends drive drunk. When, who knows, even the Truth Campaign, when you see that, I heard the Legacy Foundation, you guys know that, but, America doesn't, and it doesn't matter. And, so by creating these open source campaigns, the idea is, Brady can't convene just by saying, we're Brady, everybody needs to listen to us. That doesn't work. It didn't work in the old day and age, no less this new day and age, where you have all these very, very worthwhile efforts out there across the country. It's really being smart and strategic about it and putting the right language out there. And, if you build it, they will come. That is, I'm glad that you underscored that. And same with the public health and safety stuff, the Ask campaign. You heard Jackie talk about how they used the Ask campaign. Organizations before I got to Brady. Brady kind of runs the Million Mom March now. Really a lot of people were saying the only reason the Million Mom March chapters sustained is because they were busy doing the Ask campaign. And we probably didn't even know about half of them. We just send them the resources, and that's really what a national organization can do, to find the right strategic messaging and resources and let people be your message. I learned a lot of that from Donna Thomas, the founder of the Million Mom March, who taught me, coming out of this world of advertising, where you did spend $100 million on a campaign and you could define exactly how all of your franchisees were talking about things, the extent to which she just took things and had this fundamental respect for this idea. It was an idea before its time of open source kind of messaging. And these moms want to change the logo in Texas, and I'm flipping out thinking about what would happen if you did that with Kodak film. And and she sees it for having the value in terms of engagement. And you're really painting kind of an impressionist painting, not a realist painting. That's powerful ideas in creating.
So we'll take one more question here, and then I've got a couple more from the Twitter stream, I think. And in any event, we'll make them shorter questions and shorter answers, and then get to the next segment of the discussion. So for the live stream audience, does it matter to have boots on the ground, a major demonstration in Washington to move the issue forward?
It's really important. There are a lot of things that are being planned. If you try to, it's another one of those things, if you try to control it, it's kind of like herding cats. We don't need it to be Brady. We love the fact, and one of or two of these will probably bubble up and, be that big thing. We don't look at our role as creating, filling the mall with people. We also just having a little bit of the political insight, really in terms of bringing in the A-team as we have in terms of political strategists and operatives. These moments in time have a lot of value, but an organization like ours that's trying to really build something smart from the bottom up, to have that sustained presence, we're better off letting the folks on the ground do that work and then just adding what we can, helping them where we can in terms of the messaging and the strategy and the resources to make it happen. So it's not really a committal, it's kind of a non-committal answer. It is important. It's not going to be what we're going to focus on because there is such amazing energy and no need to recreate the wheel, only to make it a better wheel.
So, Michael, you have a question for Maria. You want to?
So to repeat your question, how have I seen the difference of rallying funds and support to promote the gun safety issue? It is tremendously different. I cannot compare it to anything in human services that I've been involved with, whether serving homeless populations, mentoring youth, aged out foster care kids, community building. This is really a unique issue, and it is a political one. In addition to the human story, it is highly controlled, and it is you're stepping into dangerous ground often when trying to seek funds that are in any way controlled by the NRA. The support of the really relatively few national foundations and the many brave and generous private foundations have been integral to some of the best work in the country. Certainly Brady's efforts through the years, also legal services, victim services. It's been very difficult for some of those foundations to be able to sustain the funding because it's been such a long movement and such a tough battle, which is, I think a big part of the appeal today, that we're hoping and encouraging funders that haven't been in this specific space but have been around it to take another closer look to understand how it is imperative to address this issue in order to move the public health agenda forward, in order to protect families, to protect communities.
Yeah. So I know here, and it's actually exactly what I wanted to say. Couple things. One is we definitely crossed the threshold in the last month in terms of, like I said in the beginning, this finally becoming, use the word hip, issue that we've always thought it needed to be to succeed and fundamentally should be based on the toll that it takes on our country. And because of this confluence of the leadership of the White House, all this great grassroots support that's out there, and us already being on the road to building something smart and sustained, it's really for the first time providing the perfect context in which to attract the next level of institutional support, which traditionally has either been on a project basis like Maria's film, or a program basis, which has really been another real value of this outcome-based public health and safety programming. CPYB was an organization that was about half the size of Brady when we folded it in, but all of that was institutional or government support, and it had all kind of left Brady over the years because Brady didn't have those outcome-based programs or even like a campaign in the context of the policy thing. So yeah, there's a threshold described, and I'll lay one number on you. Hopefully that'll be taken in the context of momentum rather than they're so flush they don't need anything more. But in the last month, so when we came to Brady, the budget was a $5 million a year organization. That was the budget for the year, and I was nervous about that, given kind of the trajectory. This was a $20 million organization 7, 8 years ago. And in December alone, since Newtown, the last month, we've raised $5 million. And we're already on pace to be a $6 or $7 million organization, which means through this real transition that's happening, we've doubled or tripled already the capacity of this organization. The context I'm hoping that will be taken in, it ain't nearly enough when you look at change on the magnitude of tobacco and drinking and driving, or what the gun lobby has, a lot of which they apply to keeping it steeped in that whole paradigm of political debate and us versus them that we're trying to break. So hopefully that will be inspirational rather than, but that's, to us, it's, we presented that, we let Politico print that yesterday for that reason. We want people to know, the gun lobby came out and said we have 100,000 new members since Newtown. First of all, we'll see your 100,000 new members and, and raise you about 4 or 5 times that for Brady, but also raise you $5 million. So, because this is an issue that the media likes to slip back to that, David versus Goliath thing. The American public feels helpless. Is our voice really being heard? That really is changing. It's changing in the context of this becoming AIDS or, I remember in those years that when we used to try to go into meetings at MTV and say, why do you have the courage to deal with that and you don't with this issue of guns? A big part of that is framing this not as a controversial issue, but as an issue that the American public is deeply committed to.
So we're going to switch gears in a minute here. Part of the equation is, obviously, in gun violence, a large part of it is guns, but a great deal of it is violence, and we have to confront violence, gang violence, drug violence. Urban violence is maybe different from rural violence, and so we have to think about efforts to prevent violence, whatever the weapon, whatever the mechanism. And this is an area that I think Roderick Jenkins has worked with as a grant maker at the New York Community Trust. It's also an area that media has focused on. At Media Impact Funders, we participate with the Council on Foundations in an annual film festival where we give the Henry Hampton Award for social documentaries. And this year, the award went to The Interrupters, which is a really powerful film by Steve James, the filmmaker behind Hoop Dreams. And this is about the work of a Chicago group called Ceasefire, now known as Cure Violence, and their work in the mean streets of Chicago to prevent violence, which very often results in or manifests itself in gun violence. So it's what I'd like to do here is to play the trailer of The Interrupters as we go into this discussion that Roderick's going to lead on violence prevention.
Ages of 13 to 24 stand up. I'm gonna be real honest with you all, because see, we real talking up here, so you can real say it like that. And one of those knowledge was outside when they say after the execution time, stand up. Each and every one of you all, if you do like me, there are people we have a responsibility to bring up our community to be vibrant.
These people step up and say, and go over and beyond. Over 500 years of prison time in this state. That's a lot of wisdom. That's why I'm out of prison. That's why I do what I do now. I can't just say I'm forget about that. I used to be in jail, speaking out rags, and this is corrected. This is, you know, kind of. Then the last thing about I'm going to say this name is the history of God. She gets here without gas can't get in.
Your mama's house, your car, those are safe doors.
How can you do that? Like that. How can you do that?
And I thank God that you have changed your life. But you just don't know what that has to do to me and my kids. I deal with this every day of my life.
You know anybody come here and tell a guy, put his gun down. We've been taught by sponsors on behavior.
They have a strong person that live that life. I think they can be saved. Whatever you do, don't believe. Do you want to be loved? Absolutely. Do you desire to be loved? Absolutely.
We still without money. In this fight, it's just a whole lot.
So we had a recent session at the Council on Foundations where we used the film interrupters as a starting point for a discussion, and the other part of the producing team, Alex Kopowitz, the author, said, well, of course, you know, this is all very important, but a large part of the equation is guns, and we really need to be talking about guns also. And the moderator of the discussion said, yes, but that's for another conference. So maybe this is the other conference that it's for, but that's the context, and I hope that's an appropriate context for you.
But thank you for inviting me. Yes, we are. So we are at a pivotal point in history. We have a president who's going to take on the NRA. In New York, we have a governor who's put forward legislation, some of the strongest gun control or gun prevention legislation in the nation. We have a mayor who has laid down the gauntlet to the president and to every other governor and mayor in the nation to prevent that. So this is a pivotal moment. So what does it mean for philanthropy? Jump in where you can. That's what it means. Questions, what does it mean to talk about gun control, or is it gun violence or gun violence prevention? If you can support national legislative action on this, go for it. If you can support research that's going to support legislative action in other states, that's what you should do. We have focused on local efforts, and gun violence prevention is a core component of our youth development program. I'm the program officer for Trust for Youth Development and Substance Abuse, and one of 8 staff at program staff. And to get at this issue, we chose to focus on it at the local level. 2 ways. Number one, to change behavior, change norms using the public health and safety approach. That's current. We've also supported empowering Hilly's organization for several years to empower young people in communities to speak out as advocates. Both are important. This is the way the trust has chosen to approach this issue. We are not shy about legislative action, but we have a vibrant national effort in the Brady campaign to prevent action in school. And New York is now a leader. We didn't have to support advocacy or lobbying to get the governor to move. Thank you. We have a great, Governor Cuomo gets what he wants, and get the legislation passed. Time to vote. So this is always good stuff. This is a great thing. Keep up on legislation in Albany. It's a beautiful thing. Track it. Advocate for it. Go to Albany. Do what you have to do. So we're ahead of the curve. The core program, the core thing we're trying to accomplish here is to try and develop community responses to violence. That's one way I can put it. Jackie and they're at the front. I mean, I have an easy time compared to what they're doing, going out and trying to change and fight We faced down the NRA, and the story that Jackie told me about the young person we told to our board. It's moving. It's this even this you kind of see that. It's quite moving. The fact is that we've had new towns in 4 communities in New York City for years. Several little new towns. We've had lots of kids get shot, and it happens every single day. A lot of times they get reported because NYPD doesn't want to track the violence. They try to downplay it. I'm not commenting on that, but when you talk about the research and documenting trends, you have to try and push back against the notion that you downplay violence in communities. It occurs every single day. What we see on the TV or what we see in the media sometimes are only the most blatant actions. You have to have people in the community begin to address it. We believe that that's one of the primary ways to stop violence in the community. Gun violence has gotten out of control. Far too many guns. 2 guns for every person in America. 3 guns? Almost 1 per person. Yeah, that's the ones we know about. Right? So illegal guns, gun violence. Our grant program is now focused on supporting public health safety approaches. We're now what they were called ceasefires. They're now called Cure Violence. 7 Cure Violence programs in New York City. These are brave people, for lack of a better word. I have to tell you, if you meet or talk to people who are willing to step in front of somebody who's willing to pull a gun out, these are heroes. They have credibility in the communities. The staff of these organizations, they're in core communities. Jackie talked a bit about them, and so the communities are well known. They're the same communities we all focus on: Central Harlem, Crown Heights, Brownsville, Far Rockaway, and Queens, amongst those communities we speak of. There are pockets of violence in these communities that take place in and around public housing projects, nicer housing. So what we did is we are working with government, with Senators Malcolm Smith and Eric Adams. I think I'm so confused. Combine them, yeah. Well, Eric Adams. And they approached us, approached the trust soon after a mother was killed in Brownsville, and we have to do something. So we convened a steering committee that's made up of NYCHA representatives and representatives of Senate legislature, and we're going to add people from the faith community to begin to think about how we can resolve the violence in the community. We also partnered with the Citizens Crime Commission to begin to help these groups document. Data is extraordinarily important, and you're right, there's not enough that we can do to help these groups begin to demonstrate that they're making a difference. So we partnered with the Citizens Crime Commission, which is probably the chief public safety group in New York, Citizens Crime Commission in New York City, which they're working with the groups around how to track and use the data and begin to work together as a group. So we have 7 groups, 7 of these ceasefire programs or Cure Violence programs in the city that are working together, which is, we think this is just after 1 year. We haven't even really completed. We'll think about renewals in June to work together to prevent violence across the 6 communities, 5 communities. We're also, so that's just one way. There are other ways. There are programs you can support, the youth development efforts that Jackie's leading. It's an enormous effort that's garnered huge public. What is it, DCTV effort was a big hit. I can only say it that way. If you look on YouTube, you'll see it, and you'll see the PSA that Jenkins produced. It's all of it's good, whether it's gun control or gun violence prevention, translated back to stopping violence. Just get your board and everybody else to see that it's about stopping violence. If you want to help young black males, if you want to make after-school programs more productive, if you want to make the community more vibrant, you have to help make them safer. And you can only do that by changing the norms. It's an enormous thing when you hear a young person tell you, I have to carry a gun because that guy has that. I I have to be around this group of guys that has access to a gun because that group of guys has access. You have to hammer away at that. You hammer away at it by having people who have spent some part or all of their lives in prison because of some silly act they may have engaged in some years ago, and you have to figure out how to engage the families who are impacted by that. It has to happen at a local level. So that's really it. I mean, for philanthropy, this is a core issue, and we are at a pivotal time. We are very fortunate to have change at every level of government, particularly in New York. It's happening in some other states. We'll have mayoral election in a few months, and it's important to hear what they have to say about this issue. We will get this legislation, I'm sure of that. Thankfully, so if you follow Governor Cuomo, you know that we're going to get this legislation. That's it. I mean, it's a big issue for us. We'll invest a few $100,000 in working at this strategy. Whether they're just helping sports programs to help rival housing projects. It's gotten so bad that kids have stakes in actual buildings. It's not even blocks anymore. They fight against, in the same housing project, other buildings. You can get shot because you don't live in the right building. It's that bad. So that's it. I mean, from a philanthropic standpoint, do what you can do. Wherever you can talk to your board about it, wherever you can bring in speakers, if you can get grants, go for it. This is a big thing. I mean, where you started. We're gonna win. We're gonna have some pretty big wins in the next year. So,
thank you, Roderick. I would just point out that the ceasefire work that you talked about here, it began in Chicago. And it was supported by a lot of Chicago funders out there, MacArthur, McCormick, I think, and others. But the major supporter for ceasefire in its national replication in Baltimore and New Orleans and many other cities is the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation. They bring their public health approach to this work and see that it's more than an analogy or a metaphor. It really is the core of the approach, which is to say that violence is a virus that spreads like a disease, and interrupt that spread. So that's a major player for anybody who's wondering sort of who's behind in the philanthropic support for that work.
In New York, it's the Trust, City Council, invested a huge amount of money in this. The young black, I'm not sure if the Young Men's Initiative.
Yes, Young Men's Initiative.
Is doing
doing some of it as well. I was going to just say this because I think some of the comments that Roderick was making kind of bring it all together with respect to what Dan was saying too. In this month of the passing of Newtown, you can see how much we know more about gun laws. We know more about the victims. We know more about what we can do because we've been kind of getting free media by virtue of the fact that it was such a horrific event. But that kind of explanation and the really examples, when you see the examples of the family members individually and hear the details, like a lot of research that Nicholas Kristof has talked about, when you hear those one story, I mean, this summer, a young man who was playing tennis was a wonderful student who was killed in Washington Heights. It didn't quite go unnoticed, but I mean, it was so heartbreakingly tragic because he was a great kid who was playing tennis, and on a Friday night there was a summer rainstorm that we've always, each experienced, and his father looked for him immediately, and he was shot and killed in a park where he should have been able to enjoy himself. Those stories in inner cities are untold stories that really, I think, need to be told, of all the young, promising people that we are not focusing on in a way that profoundly affects, because I think to myself, what do the friends of that young man think? He did everything right and nobody paid attention. So, was he valuable? Do we care? Did the police care? There's all kinds of unanswered questions out there that we should not, as a group of public advocates, leave unanswered. We should answer that with a public health and a public education and awareness campaign where we say that young man was extremely important to our future and he's gone, just like the kids were extremely important in Newtown.
So I have a question from Lori coming up. But is there a clip or something we've got beyond bullets, which both of you have referred to there? Is there a short clip that we can identify that would be, or if not immediately, we can just urge people to check it out?
I would say check it out. There are individual stories about community activists working all over New York and talking about the people in their lives who they have lost and what they've done as a result of having this website and having the help of DCTV.
Very good. Okay, so for people listening in on the live stream, beyondbullets.org is the website we're looking at, which is a collaboration with Downtown Community Television Center and New Yorkers Against Gun Violence.
We are one of the contributors. Other community agencies are also represented and contribute there.
Okay, Roy. Oh no, we're done.
Well, I can tell you that the City Council Gun Violence Task Force discussed the criminalization of students by virtue of having security, and it's definitely a very big problem because ordinary behavioral issues that would have been addressed by a guidance counselor or someone else in results, if there's a police officer on site, I mean, let's be realistic. They know how to arrest people, and they know how to find sort of crimes that define behavior if you look at behavior in certain ways. If they're not there, most of the time those kinds of situations would be resolved. So I think that we have to put the brakes on when we talk about having police officers in all schools around, certainly around the city or around the country. I think we have to look at some of our policies. Frankly, I think we have to look at the stop and frisk policy and say, whatever the intention is, if you have 700,000 young men of color in one city who are stopped in 1 year, you have to really look at that and say, is that a benefit to making those people feel more a part of society? Are those people going to get in touch with the police next time they see a crime? I mean, do you want them to be alienated? You have to look at some of the policies that are being proffered for one purpose, as you say, and then there's the law of unintended consequences that you've just described. So I think it's not a great thing to have police officers at every school in the city or in the country or anything else. I think schools, this is part of what Dan was saying before, is once we start talking that language, we've already lost, the whole thing is already lost. Our schools shouldn't be perceived as places where we need to have police officers or security officers. They are places of learning. They should be open. I mean, every grammar school in my community has like 30 doors. It's not realistic to think of them in any other way as open places. So I think it is important for us to be a part, and some of those issues are tangential. We've looked at an issue which is slightly tangential to our mission, but I think very impactful. And the state of New York has among the lowest rates of treating young people as adults for the purposes of the criminal justice system. And we're not talking about violent people, we're talking about nonviolent people. So we and the state of North Carolina are the only two states in the country that treat nonviolent offenses as an adult offense, 16 to 17-year-olds. And so we're part of a movement with Judge Corriero who's working on changing that, because when those young people go to prison, there are no services that are appropriate to their age group. So they are literally thrown into the prison population, which is adult. Nothing good happens there. Nobody comes out of that a better person. So I believe in the preventative work. I believe in analyzing some of the processes that we take for granted. And we are willing to jump in on these issues. I mean, we would do more work, like a lot of other small nonprofits if we had more money. But there are issues right here and right now that could use support of funders.
So let me just jump in here. First to say that for people on the live stream, you probably inferred, but I'll just clarify, that was from a question from Lori Bazzaler, president of the Hazen Foundation, which essentially said a concern about the collision of one good policy idea with bad unintended consequences. And so particularly putting a lot more police in schools might sound like a good violence prevention idea to some people, but actually has potentially great negative consequences in as has been explored and developed in other philanthropic circles too. So I just want to acknowledge that we're ostensibly at the closing of this section, but we gave ourselves 15 minutes of buffer between the next part of the discussion. So I'm going to infer through all the frantically raised hands that we can stay here for another 10 minutes on this conversation, unless anybody objects, and then I'm going to go 1, 2, 3.
Our perspective on the last conversation is a little bit different. Without at all, being no commentary on the validity or even outright importance of the work that Jackie and New Yorkers Against Gun Violence and all of your foundations are doing on this issue. This gun violence, just gun violence, forget violence in general, is an incredibly complex issue. And as soon as you start kind of peeling away that onion, there's layer after layer, socioeconomics, prison, drugs, domestic abuse. We look at our role on this issue as, never letting the Venn diagram between those issues and the role of the gun get pulled apart. Because what's happened historically as it relates to guns and the immediate opportunity to do something tangible to prevent gun violence is it gets diffused, because, there are a number of voices out there talking about all these important issues from the perspective of important foundations and important organizations and their overlap with gun. You're seeing it now with mental health. You hear it around violence in the media, all these very important things. It's important to validate those conversations. It's important to fund those conversations. But it's also important to kind of, at this critical moment, to keep our eye on the prize in terms of the intersection between those issues and, what we can do from a policy perspective and from a public health and safety perspective immediately to reduce gun violence based on the role that the gun plays. Which is why, we're not engaging in the conversation around guns in school. It's an important conversation. It's not the conversation that the American public wants. We don't believe, the American public doesn't believe that that's an answer at all. Instead, we want to have a conversation about universal background checks to keep guns off the streets of our inner cities, which would have an impact on gun violence. And Roderick, I just want to say, it's what I particularly appreciate about your remarks is, I've been in a lot of panels with Gary and with David Kennedy and the other ceasefire model, and it always seems to get pulled apart from this conversation about what we can do right now in terms of policy to keep guns off the streets, out of the hands of these kids. And we really, we're working as hard as we can to ground the current conversation in that without at all undermining very important conversations. And I would also take heart, yes, I have a feeling that's going to be, based on conversations directly with the Vice President, and it's going to be in there for political reasons, and, it gets ugly, you don't want to see how the sausage is made. I do know that the task force, though, is deeply committed to, figuring out what we can do to prevent the most, the politics comes into play and everything, to prevent the most possible gun violence, and they're committed, representatives from ceasefire were there in the task force meetings, to exploring the public health and safety solutions as well, realizing the importance of those.
So a quick show of hands for lightning round questions. 1, 2, okay. So
Yeah,
just to reiterate.
The question is, what can the role of the gun industry be right now in terms of leveraging it, working with, using their money to address this problem? The gun lobby, the leadership of the NRA, they're digging their heels in. I think we have to take this to another level of public outrage, or, as with tobacco, the lawsuits. Of course, it's another area where they've been extraordinarily effective in terms of immunizing themselves against lawsuits before there's much of a hope of that. So right now, our focus in that regard is demonstrating the disconnect that exists, another disconnect between what the leadership of the gun lobby is out there saying and what their members, their very members, believe, because they're citing their members that they, rile up over this false notion that, gun laws, and they're all untrue, would, take their guns away as law-abiding, responsible hunters, a violation of their Second Amendment rights, and, it's enabling politicians who know the right thing to do to kind of use that language. We believe there's a significant opportunity in terms of demonstrating the disconnect that exists. So when Wayne LaPierre gave that press conference, our response wasn't to get drawn into this conversation about more guns equals more safety. It was to say 74% of the you NRA members support universal background checks. Join us. And if there is an opportunity to turn them ultimately, and there has to be, because it is part of the arc of every one of these things, I think it'll be changing some of the regulations in terms of enabling these lawsuits to really take the hold that they can, and also jujitsu, using their members against them to make. I was on the Geraldo show the other night, and he held up his NRA card at the end of the segment and said, Dan, should I cut it up? And I said, no. Fight the power from within. You represent the average NRA member who supports sensible laws. There has been historically.
So again, just to reiterate, it's not just the industry representatives, but the industry itself, the companies which are is a major employer in the state of Connecticut.
There has been historically on a couple of fronts. The NRA itself used to be in favor of gun safety, kind of realizing, until kind of having this coup that happened. Right now there is that herd mentality, and they have, even there have been some things that have really come close in terms of really announcing gun industry support for specific policies, or technology is another angle. By putting this technology that exists in so many facets of our lives with radio ID, you could prevent, considering the millions of guns across America that are stolen every year, and wind up, talk about that epidemiology, using crimes would prevent a ton of gun violence. Right now, though, and it's the same, it's probably more akin to the auto industry than anything, and what Ralph Nader was able to do, which the vice president talked about in our meeting. We're at much closer now, given what we've accomplished in the last month, but we're not at the point yet where we have the level of public scrutiny and pressure that will force them to do things like I'm sure you're envisioning. I am more hopeful than ever that we're going to get there, and we have to get there in order, but we're only going to get there by creating that kind of public scrutiny and public spotlight, because they're not going to do anything unless they have to. They're not financially incentivized to do it, and they think that they're representing, this kind of party line that is just absolutely against any policy reform.
So there is a model, right? In an effort to change politics in South Africa, right? There was this notion that government should disinvest in companies that do business. That may be a strategy. It's tough, but I think you have to try to use the levers that you have available. Government is going to be, particularly when you look at New York, it's going to be pushed to react. Other states, particularly to do something. This is a big day in the legislation is going to be far-reaching. Will create false similar. So I don't know. I mean, child's a big deal.
I would also point out there's a retail component too. So there's the manufacturers, and then there's Walmart. And there are things that can be done through public pressure, short of legislation, that I believe I don't know if it's going to be public or behind the scenes, but I know that the administration is interested in having those conversations directly with the biggest retailers of Bushmaster AR-15s to lead by example and really start a movement in terms of not selling them. Right, right.
One more question, and then we'll get to closing thoughts too.
Tons. And they're organizing. What's the role of women, women's groups, mothers on this issue is the question. Going back to the Million Mom March, and even before it, there's a rich history around the importance of women's voices on this issue, the moral authority that mothers have. One of the most inspiring things over the last month has really been seeing how that voice has been re-energized. It's also a good example of kind of this open source notion of campaigning that we have. A woman, Shannon Watts, founded this thing, 1 Million Moms for Gun Control. She had a nervous phone call with me initially, thinking that she was going to get a cease and desist, because Million Mom March is great. We're like, what can we do to support you? It's such a vital. They may wind up doing one of these big marches. That's wonderful. Rising tide lifts all ships, and the women's voice is a vitally important part of that for several reasons. Moral authority of mothers, of parents, the extent to which violence against women is one of those very important Venn diagram issues. We started to have that conversation around the NFL tragedy with Javon Belcher. That was indicative of violence that happens every day in our country. And also, there's I believe, a role, and we've seen it through our Ask campaign, a role that women can play in creating change in households. So the way we've seen our Ask campaign work, ask your neighbor if there's a gun in the homes where your kid's playing, is, the message is communicated, whether it's through a pediatrician or the media or whatever it is. It's usually the mother who adopts that message, starts asking other homes, and then starts making the decision to other mothers that I'm not going to let my child play there. And then it's that mother who goes to the husband and says, I've been saying to get rid of that thing for the last 10 years, and now we're the laughing stock of the neighborhood. We're pariahs. We can't even have a child. Or I've been saying to store it safely. Don't store it in a sock, whatever it is. So in terms of actually this is just a story I heard yesterday about somebody who stored a gun in a sock on their, right. So the role of women in actually implementing the change, and obviously you look at other issues like drunk driving, and it's vitally important, especially right now. And
just jump in.
I would actually, I shouldn't have been the director on this panel if there's anybody else who wants to say anything.
There's always that. But, so I do want to turn to Maria first to once again thank you, not only for everything you've done here, but also to acknowledge that she came from her own board meeting, which she was chairing, to be here for this, and she has to go somewhere else.